Hello, everybody. Happy Friday and welcome to Beyond the Steps. I am your co host, Bree Zabrowski, co founder and CEO of Apollo Performance, back with my friend, Melissa McDaniel of Turning Point, McDaniel Grisham of Turning Point Creations. I'll never get it right. And this is Beyond the Steps. This is the show we're going to talk to you about all the things related to the dance industry. We pick one question on one topic, anything from gender equity to racism to psychology, nutrition, sex abuse and prevention, dance medicine and science, and we explore how those topics are affecting performance athletes. And we invite one guest expert to join us to do it. And today we're chatting with Ashley Mowrey about how practicing self-compassion can improve the health and performance of both you and your young performance athletes. This is one that we don't hear a lot about, so we're really interested to dive into this today. As always, we want you to like, subscribe, share this conversation. That's the only way we can get this information out there. Please help us do that. And always drop your questions and comments for us in the chat because we want to hear from you and we'll make sure we answer them if we catch them. So without further ado, Melissa, why don't you introduce Ashley for those of our viewers that have not met her before?
I mean, I can't imagine that no one has
I
met
know.
Ashley because
I
she
know.
is a consistent guest for us here on Beyond the Steps. Ashley is a mindset coach and educator for dancers located in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Is it Arkansas or Arizona? You're in Arkansas, right?
Arkansas.
She,
Yep.
I was like, it's an A state. She holds a BA in psychology from the University of Arkansas and is a certified professional coach through Coach Training World, a trained facilitator in Tara Moore's Playing Big leadership program for women, and a specialist for Doctors for Dancers. Ashley trained as a competitive dancer out of Dallas, Texas, big dance state, before teaching and eventually directing a company and dance studio in Fayetteville. It was during these years that she felt drawn to the dancer's mindset and the need for training and tools in the dance community to foster mental health and well being. She travels and sees clients all over the place via Skype, via Zoom, all over the country. Digital, everything's digital these days. So Ashley is accessible to you as well. Ashley was also recently featured in Dance Studio Amplified podcast, episode 14, Dance Boss, as a university mastermind guest presenter, and the episode 58 of the Dance Boss podcast. And of course, here on Beyond the Steps, I believe this is our second installment, maybe.
Yeah.
What we have Ashley, she's doing a series for us. And today we're going to talk about self-compassion. So I'd love to get started.
Yeah, Ash, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's always fun to have you. You've been a friend of ours for a while and you just have such great insight and your business is growing because this is such mental health for young performance athletes is so important and we've learned so much about it. So the work you do is very, very important. I want to start, as you know, we always like to start with the basics here at Beyond the Steps. So I want to talk a little bit about what your perspective is on the definition of compassion and how does that differ, if it does differ, I don't know, I want you to tell us that, from sympathy and empathy.
Yeah. So compassion, sympathy, and empathy are all really closely related, as you guessed. And actually, the definition by the American Psychological Association of compassion has the word sympathy in it. So they define compassion as feeling a deep sense of sympathy towards someone else when they are experiencing suffering. And it's a desire to lend comfort and help. Okay, so sympathy is understanding somebody else's feelings, empathy is feeling those feelings, and compassion is understanding and having the desire to lend comfort and help to them.
Okay, I love that. That's a nice, easy, quick explanation. So we always hear about how important compassion is for others, right? And we know this. It's like something that's an unspoken rule of society, right? But rarely do we hear about how we should show compassion for ourselves. That's always what seems to be last on the list, especially the older you get, is showing that compassion for yourself. So why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. I think one thing is self-compassion is pretty misunderstood, and I think we'll probably talk about that later as we go on. So I think that misunderstanding is part of it. I also think, we as a society are often taught to put ourselves last. And to, whether that's because of people-pleasing tendencies or perfectionism or just like sometimes it's hard to look inward. Sometimes it is hard to sit with your discomfort and sit with your pain and to acknowledge it. And so I think, whether it's that people pleasing, just trying to help others, or it's just a not wanting to go inward, I think both of those things are contributing factors.
Do you feel like it's a bigger issue with women versus men, or do you think it's universal?
I think it's universal. When I think about women, I think and this is just my generalization, right?
Sure.
There's so many different things, and often things aren't completely genderized.
Right.
Of course.
But from my perspective, I think with women, there is that desire for people pleasing and for helping others. And then for men, I'm curious if there is maybe this tendency to not want to look inward, because that might appear weak, or
Interesting.
not wanting to offer themselves that comfort. So I think it could be both things.
Yeah, I think that's highly, highly socialized. It's hard.
Yes.
We often say, oh, we're generalizing, men do this or women do this and girls do this. Actually, a child comes into the world and then they're socialized based on what their assigned gender is to act or behave in certain ways. Not necessarily that is assigned to their gender,
Right.
but it's how they're socialized. And I do think that there's a good amount of guilt associated with children who are assigned female at birth to help and nurture, and you should be nice to them and you should share. And then you get people who are assigned male as you should be rough and tumble and you shouldn't cry. You should do. So, I think that that's a highly socialized thing. And I think this kind of leads into my next question about self-compassion. Do you think that people look at showing yourself that level of sympathy and help as being whiny or weak, and that's why we don't really do it?
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it. As I said, there's a lot of misconceptions around self-compassion, so many so that Dr. Kristen Neff, who is one of the leading researchers on self-compassion, she actually has an entire page on her website about what self-compassion isn't, because there are these misconceptions that it means we're weak, it means we're whiny, it means we're having self-pity. And so I shared the link with you all, and I think I'll share it with everybody so that they can check out that tab. But a couple things that I'll note that Kristen Neff explains is, she explains, when we are whining or have self-pity, we are very much in that woe is me mindset. We're very much feeling isolated in those feelings. And we have those feelings of I'm the only one in the world experiencing this. But one of the 3 key components to self-compassion is that we honor our common humanity. That means that we remember that in this human experience, there are mistakes, failures, setbacks, pain, suffering, and that during those moments, we remember that that is part of being a human and that we are not alone in those feelings. So that's something I like to think about too, is the difference between that, which, self-pity and whining is very woe is me, whereas self-compassion is remembering that we all have these shared experiences. Another point that I'll note too is that several studies have shown that people who practice self-compassion are actually better able to cope in tough situations.
Interesting.
So research is showing the opposite of weakness, that people who practice self-compassion can better cope in tough situations.
Interesting.
I have a question that's related to the idea that, we're all going through this. Showing self-compassion is that understanding that it's not just woe is me, it's whoa, all of us, and let's pull together and figure out how we're going to get through this together. But do you think that social media is seriously hindering that ability to say, woe is us? Because you don't see that other people are going through the same thing that you are. You see that they're traveling the world and they're wearing the cutest clothes and they're, doing 50,000 turns without, and they only go to dance 3 hours a week. You're seeing those types of things and you're like, well, I can only get out a single pirouette. It just must be me. Oh my gosh. Yes. Do you think that contributes at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely does. I think social media contributes so many things, and that both positive and negative, but a lot of negative stuff as far as that goes, because we're seeing other people's highlight reels. And so I think that's another reminder to all of us, and something that I've really tried to do is like really follow people who show up authentically on social media, who like you can see, that it isn't always just a highlight reel and that things are imperfect at times. And I also think that's a good reminder too, to connect with people in person more, right? And so have these conversations and be vulnerable with your close friends and loved ones and family, and be able to have those conversations of, I'm struggling with this right now. I'm going through this. And then also, I think we have such a beautiful role with the children in our lives, whether that's like as parents or as teachers or educators or whatever, as also being able to not making it about us when they're struggling, but being able to offer that, oh, you are experiencing disappointment right now. I felt that too. And it's really hard and you're not alone, and being able to offer that support, that like their experience of disappointment is not isolating.
As we're talking about this, I want to make sure we're not dancing around it. Can you, I know we have to go to the next section, but like, can you give an example of a situation where an educator or a dancer would show self-compassion in an effective, healthy way, a model of self-compassion?
Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of today, I'm going to offer some resources so that people can practice self-compassion on their own. But first, I want to give a quick description of self-compassion and the 3 key components of it, and then like how we can practice it. So in its simplest definition, self-compassion is offering yourself the same kindness and understanding that you would to a close friend or a loved one. Okay, so giving ourselves that same kindness and understanding. The 3 components, number 1 is practicing self-kindness instead of self-judgment. So that's those kind words to ourselves instead of judging ourselves for our mistakes and failures. The second component is what I was talking about earlier with common humanity. So remembering and honoring our common humanity instead of isolation. So remembering that we are all connected. We are not in this alone, and that mistakes, imperfections, failures, suffering is all part of the human experience. The third component is mindfulness instead of over-identification. So what that means is, so instead of when we have a feeling of discomfort or a feeling of like, let's say we made a mistake and we messed up something, instead of going into the extremes that can bring, so those feelings of extreme, like spiraling down into like sadness and disappointment, or the other extreme would be to suppress those feelings and to like push them away and not go there. With self-compassion, we want to practice mindfulness, those neutral observations and acceptance of the current experience and our feelings surrounding it.
Okay.
So how that could show up for dancers in a really simple way is just to start to notice when you're being self-critical or self-doubt comes up. Start to recognize those voices, right? Don't try to turn them away. Don't try to argue with them. Just notice them. And then pause and ask yourself, what would I say to my best friend in this situation? If they were saying these things to themselves, if they were going through this struggle, what words of kindness and understanding and wisdom would I offer them? And then say those things to yourself.
That's interesting. And dance educators, I would say the same thing, right? Because so often as dance educators, we are not giving ourselves enough compassion. We're very hard on ourselves. We put a lot of expectation, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. But this goes for dance educators too, because if you're not protecting your peace, if you're not giving yourself that space, right, then how are you modeling that behavior for your students? How are you setting that culture at your studio? All the things, right? It's a trickle down. So thank you for explaining. I thought, like, let's give an example so we're not dancing around this idea of a self-compassion the whole episode. Like, let's put it out there. What does that look like in real life, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's always important, because you read the books and you're like, yeah, okay.
Well, what is it really? Yeah.
Right. What am I really
What is it really? What am I actually doing here?
Exactly. If you're just now joining us, we are talking to Ashley Mowrey about how we can practice self-compassion to improve health and performance of both us as educators and coaches and our youth performance athletes. We want to know what you think. Please drop your comments. We want to hear how you are practicing this or how you need to practice this or your big aha moments. Please share this episode. It's not too late. We still have a lot of show in front of us and a lot of things that we can learn. So make sure that you are sharing and letting everybody know that we are on right now with Ashley Mowrey. So I have a question about showing yourself self-compassion. Showing yourself compassion is what I'm trying to get out here. And the new buzzword, there's always a buzzword. Grace. I'm showing myself grace. I'm showing you grace. You should show grace. Is that the same thing as self-compassion? Because people are easy to use grace. I'm showing myself grace. But then they probably wouldn't.
I have thoughts about this, but I want to hear what Ashley has to say.
Yeah, like
I want to hear Bree's thoughts too.
No, you don't. I'll share them after you. I need time to formulate.
So, I think it's an interesting question, and I think they're probably similar. I think, and I'm not sure. It's interesting because it depends, I think, on how people are using showing themselves grace, right? If they're saying show yourself grace just to like be self-indulgent or like do whatever they want or whatever, like that's not self-compassion. So in that instance, I would say like, no, they're different things. I think if you think about showing yourself grace in the sense of just like showing grace for yourself, giving yourself forgiveness and understanding, yeah, that's pretty similar. I think showing yourself grace is the more like colloquial term being used right now, whereas self-compassion is the more defined and researched term that has actual steps to practicing it.
Right.
Yeah. I see oftentimes we use the term as give them grace, give yourself grace as an excuse to excuse poor judgment or poor decision making. And I that's like a really nice way to say it. But yes, I think that we want to be careful that we're going into the more of the self-compassion and not just saying give grace to say something, right? Like you have to mean that, it has to apply. I see that often. So
yeah. And too, like, I think, when we think about like the difference between like making excuses and then holding like ourselves and other people accountable, I think self-compassion is such an interesting and important component in holding ourselves accountable, right? Because to practice self-compassion, we have to acknowledge the pain that we're feeling. Right. And so we have to acknowledge that. And it can really help us through times of taking accountability and can be there to take care of ourselves when we need to take accountability or when we need to hold others accountable too.
Yeah. And I think what I hope people take from this is, because I know I do this to myself too. Like, you're really hard on yourself when things, you hindsight is 2020, but you look at something after the fact and go, why did I do that? I know better. I should have done this. I should have done that. And it's really hard to forgive yourself in those moments and not focus on what you could have, should have, would have done. And I hope people realize that that's really what we're aiming for today with the students, with yourself, so that you can move forward from a positive perspective instead of living in the negative space. Yeah.
I like that we're using the word accountable, because I think that leads into my next question. Holding yourself accountable versus beating yourself up. I think there is
a fine line.
Like a super, super fine line. And I would love to hear your thoughts, Ashley, on how we balance, quote unquote, mental toughness and self-compassion.
Ashley, I'm gonna tack onto that and say, if you could address this from two perspectives, address this to an adult and address this to a child, because really, like, if this is so hard for us as adults, I can't imagine the concept of grasping this concept as a child, and how hard it is for them to understand and practice that, right? Because we don't even get it. Like, I'm 42 and I'm like, I'm still figuring it out, So
this is a really great question. And I think it's important to note that mental toughness and self-compassion go hand in hand. When we think about mental toughness, that is, being able to navigate difficult situations, being able to bounce back, knowing when to push yourself and when to rest, all of these things that contribute to mental toughness. And self-compassion can help support those things. So I'll kind of talk from the adult perspective first and just make a couple notes. So research on self-compassion shows that people who practice self-compassion have increased intrinsic motivation. So that's that internal motivation. They have a higher desire to learn and grow. They have less fear of failure, and they're more likely to try again and show effort after a failure. So all of those things are huge parts of mental toughness, right? Mental toughness doesn't mean suppressing, pushing down, being this, tough, strong thing that doesn't feel things, right? Mental toughness is an awareness of your feelings and how they play into your behaviors and being able to navigate those things in a resilient way. So they really go hand in hand. To kids, I would take the approach of, again, that they support each other, right? So we have mental toughness, and something that can help us in tough situations is self-compassion, right? So self-compassion is not excusing our behaviors. It's not making excuses. It's not being lazy. Self-compassion is acknowledging what we are going through, acknowledging that it is difficult, acknowledging that it's okay for humans to have difficult moments. And it's very normal to make mistakes and have failures. And then in those moments, we can still show ourselves understanding and kindness. And that's how I would break it down to kids.
Yeah. Because I do think there is this stigma with performance athletes in general that mental toughness means that things don't get to you, that you have to tune it all out, and that's in fact what you're saying. It is not that. It is something else. It is the ability to field and deal with all of those things and compartmentalize them in the appropriate space until you can give it the time that it needs.
Right.
Yes. And being able to cope with those tough situations, which we talked about earlier,
And I think as educators, we have to ask ourselves, I just did a conversation with Dance Studio Owners Association in our circle, and, they're an amazing group of educators that really, they care about what they're doing, right? And they're always striving to do better, but constantly questioning yourself, what am I promoting in the culture of my studio? What am I putting forward? What are people going to see when they look at the representation, my staff, my classes, my, what they feel when they walk in the door? And one of those things is, are you promoting that stigma of mental toughness, right? With the way that you're structuring your curriculum and your classes, or are you really teaching them to be resilient and, to be positive in the way they talk to themselves and address situations? And is your studio set up to facilitate that? Right.
Yeah.
I don't always think that they are. I think that we all like to think that we have it, like we got it down. But I think it's constantly reassessing as an educator. I understand what it means, and I understand what I want to put forward, but what am I putting forward in reality?
Yeah. And I love that you're having those conversations. That's so important. And I think always, whenever I'm talking to educators, culture is one of the biggest things that we go back to. When I'm working with educators, a lot of times I talk about the 3 C's, which are, then this is just a program that I've created to help them with these things and incorporate them in the classroom. But it's culture, communication, and connection, right? How are we approaching these things? And culture affects all of those things under it. And so
absolutely. I mean, the segment that I was doing was about customer retention, and this, it absolutely does have an impact on everything, because we all deal with burnout as educators. Your mental the ability to deal with all of the things that kids have to deal with now, and that educators have to deal with now, is it's heavy. There's a lot, right? And that toughness, that empathy, that self-care is so important to being able to continue to move forward. And this idea of burnout, and that kids are quitting earlier and younger and younger and younger, it's because they're not practicing that. They don't have the ability to tackle all of these things. And we're not nurturing that enough as educators and creating a space where they can. So they have to feel like they make a choice. So when you're talking about culture and retention and all of these things, you're keeping these people for longer if you can figure out the process
yes,
to support all of this.
Right.
Yes.
And you
Yeah.
have to figure out that process while teaching good dance.
Yes. And that's
Yes.
what I said too.
Also
Like,
that.
you are not, I mean, Ashley, you're a professional and you're licensed to do this. Like, we as dance educators, they really have the burden of so many different, and some of it is self-placed, right? But like wearing a lot of different hats and shouldering a lot of responsibilities. They have to be, educator, counselor, parent, support system, dietitian, and diagnostic. All of these things happen in the course of their day-to-day job. But it really, at the end of the day, and that's what I said, you are here to teach dance. Like, you are quality dance instruction, but you have all these little arms that care about these things that contribute to a whole happy, healthy human, right? And so you have to emphasize those things in the training of their dance, but leave the rest of it to a professional. Build out those resources, connect with the Ashley Mowreys of the world, right? And let them do the rest of it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why
I
I
think
love
everybody's getting stuck,
Yeah. And that's why I love working with teachers so much. I taught for 10 years before I did this. So I feel like I remember those feelings of like, I want to create this certain culture, but I don't know how to do that. And I don't know how to step away from the environment that I grew up in and create the culture that I want. And I just didn't have the tools to be able to help my kids in these situations. And so that's why I love working with teachers and working with them to figure out how they can incorporate mindset skills into their curriculum in a way that feels very authentic to them.
Where it's the focus is still dancing, because that's what they're there to do, right? But again, it's just these nuances are part of the culture of the environment that you're teaching in. So for those just joining, I'm Bree with Apollo. This is Melissa McDaniel Grisham and Ashley Mowrey. This is Beyond the Steps. We talk about all the things related to performance athletes, from gender inequity, racism, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, and of course, dance medicine and science. And we ask one question today. It is, how can practicing self-compassion and improve the health and performance of yourself and your student athletes, the performance athletes that you're working with? It's something, self-compassion, we talk about compassion for others, but it's not often that we're talking about self-compassion. And what is the difference between self-compassion and the stigma of mental toughness, right? We're addressing all of that today. So go back and rewatch this episode from the beginning if you've missed it. We're having a great chat. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe, because we want to continue to get this information out there. Ashley, how can self-compassion improve the way educators are teaching and relating to their students? Now let's shift to that. The relatability between educator, that connection between educator and student is so important. And you really can, if you take that extra 5 minutes to really just connect with them on a human level, you can pull so much more out of them and build that trust, right? So how does self-compassion help with all of that?
Yeah. So I think, I want to talk about two things that will help with that. So I think the first thing to keep in mind is how many benefits self-compassion has on our mental health. And so there are multiple studies that have shown that self-compassion can reduce anxiety, depression, shame, rumination, stress, perfectionism, and eating disorders. And if we can reduce those things and have that greater happiness, greater life satisfaction, greater connectedness, greater self-confidence, we are going to be able to show up better as dance educators and be able to have those connections with our dancers. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing that I think about is if we are giving ourselves compassion, we're going to also be in that mindset to give others compassion as well, and remembering our common humanity, right? So when we're offering ourselves self-compassion of this is really difficult, this is really hard, we're going to be able to do that for our dancers too, and also model that for them and raise dancers who know how to navigate these hard situations when they are flooded with feelings of disappointment or embarrassment or failure. They are going to be equipped with how to navigate that and how to handle their feelings and how to offer themselves kindness and understanding and be able to bounce back and be more resilient. So I think, connecting with them, talking to them about self-compassion and then modeling it for them is a great way to connect with their students and to feel more like to improve that relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it makes so much sense because how many times, Melissa, and I know you felt this, I felt this, I do this as a mother as well. Like when you're just overwhelmed and stressed out and you're mad at yourself and you're having an awful day and you haven't hit that reset button and you go into a class to try to teach, they are not getting the best version of you, right? And I know we have to, again, give ourselves grace and space to have, we're human, right? But the reality is that the person that is going in like that, they are not getting the best version of you. You are not giving the best version of you. You're not feeling good. Chances are they're not feeling good. So, I mean, Melissa, how many times have you had that happen?
All the time, especially during competition season, which is what you're in the middle of now. You're off the road, you're back, you got class, you're back on the road. I mean, you're constantly in a space of thinking about the last competition and then thinking about the next competition, and the space in between is not warm and fuzzy. Warm and fuzzy a lot of times, and it makes it very, very difficult. And to your point, Bree, I often leave and I'm like, man, today was really crappy.
Sure.
Like I was not a good teacher today.
Yeah.
And then you're like,
and then you have to practice self-compassion.
Then you have to start all over again. It's a whole lot, and we really do need to start working on it.
Go ahead, Ash. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, too, I think those moments are like when we need self-compassion the most, right? And so I know something that I've really been working on, and this is on Kristen Neff's website under her I can't remember what she calls the tabs, but practices, I think is what she calls it, ways to practice self-compassion. But taking a really short self-compassion break where you just take a couple minutes and you acknowledge the feelings that are present, right? I am coming into this class and I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling disappointed in myself. And then reminding yourself, these are part of being a human. I'm not alone in these feelings. How many other dance teachers right now during competition season are feeling these same things?
Yeah.
And then, okay, what are the words of kindness that I can offer to myself right now? What words do I need to hear right now? And just taking a minute to do that. And it's not as if it's not some magical spell where everything's just going to be rainbows and butterflies, but it's going to offer ourselves that support in those moments, and it's going to help us practice that more and more.
Yeah, thank you. So do you think there is a correlation between the mental wellness of the coach and the teacher and the overall performance of the athlete or performers or artists that they're working with?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that, I mean, like we all have lived experiences probably of like, when your teacher comes in and if they are full of fear of failure, or you can sense their anxiety or their perfectionism or their body image stuff, whatever it is, like that feeds out into the class. That affects how they communicate, that affects how they teach, the culture that they're creating, which definitely affects the students and their ability and their performance. So yeah, I think that there's a big correlation there.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm a big proponent, and just from a mental health perspective, of kind of forecasting. Okay, this is going to be a tough time. Like I can already see this coming, because we're just going, we get hit with, whoa, why am I feeling like this? Or I didn't know, like you didn't know competition season comes every same time every year. Christmas is the same day every year. How are you not prepared? But as you're going through life, you're just constantly getting hit with the next thing. Brie and I had an episode of that this week. We're like, whoa, how did that get here that quick? So what do you think are the moments where, and we'll use dance specifically just because that's where our specialty is. What are the moments that we can kind of see these are probably going to be moments where we're going to have to practice self-compassion as dance educators?
Like, can you pre-plan that out? Like, can you anticipate that and like have that like an outline?
Self-compassion outline,
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a lot that we can do to, I think self-reflection is a huge part of this process, right? So reflecting on those times where you are harder on yourself, or where you are having those moments of fear of failure or feeling overwhelmed, so those are going to be very specific to the people. And I would encourage everybody to reflect on when you have those moments. But some of the ones that come to mind for me that I've experienced, and I know a lot of the teachers that I work with experience, the first one that comes to mind to me is body image stuff. You know, I think a lot of us in our generation were raised in pretty toxic body image studios.
Yeah,
And, now as teachers, as adults, our bodies are changing and we're still having to teach in front of a mirror all day, every
good
day.
point.
And
Yeah.
so that can be a lot. And so, I know for me, that was one of my toughest like self-criticism moments. So I think body image would be a good thing to explore and to, use some self-compassion during. The other things that come to mind are, at competitions, the overwhelm, the losses, the mistakes that happen, both in your students and within yourself. I think undermotivated students or are, what we think are undermotivated students. I think sometimes we can take that really personally, and really beat
So
ourselves up
true.
about that. And
So
so I
true.
think that's a moment. I think students leaving our studio,
Yes.
whether that's going to another studio or quitting, that is so hard. And we need so much self-compassion during those moments. And then the last one that I thought of is harsh feedback from parents. I think anytime we get that, or maybe just harsh feedback in general, is feedback's hard to take sometimes. And especially when these educators are trying so hard and putting so much of themselves into their work and into their choreography and their teaching, it can be really hard when somebody gives us harsh criticism back. And so those are really great and important moments to practice self-compassion.
Yep.
Exactly. I'm so glad you talked about the leaving portion, because I know that those
Oh,
are the
it's
times
brutal.
it's
It's
It's so
brutal.
hard.
It's brutal.
brutal, and people don't understand. They're like, well, it's a business, and they just left, and it's like, no, to the what we were talking about earlier. You were their confidant, their
Yeah.
counselor,
Yeah.
their surrogate parent when they weren't there, their friend, their teacher, and then they're gone.
Yeah.
And that is so huge. And I think that, preparing for that can also cause some anxiety, because you're like, okay, the end of the year is coming, and you're looking around and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
you
You're
look like
staying.
are
Yeah.
you staying? Are you going, oh, she was really mad? Like, you're trying to prepare for that, but
Yep.
understand people are going to do it. It's going to happen. And it's not necessarily always because of you, but you do
Yes.
still need to navigate it and deal with
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
And the fact that we all three
Mm-hmm.
were like, oh yeah, we've all experienced that. We're not alone, right? Like you're not the only teacher to lose students to the studio down the street. And so remembering that and remembering that like you aren't alone in that and that it's not like inherently your fault that they're leaving, is a really important thing too.
And I think it is important to deal with it and to find a way to grasp it and be able to let it go, because it really does affect how you allow your relationships to expand with your students that are staying. I noticed that there was like a mass exodus one year, and of the whole, I want to do more, and I want to be a kid, and I want to do things in high school, and I want to do dance team, and not all the things, right? So there was like a mass exodus, and I mean it was just rocked my world. I was not sleeping, I was not eating, it just felt, I had knots in my stomach all the time. It just didn't feel good.
Yeah.
And I noticed I definitely went into that next season with some armor on. Like, I mean, it eventually came off, but I can, knowing what I know now and being able to step away from it and look at it from, a higher level, like, there's so many things I wish I could do again,
Yep.
because I do see that. Like I went in very tough as nails. I can only imagine what it felt like for the kids that stayed. Like, what did I do? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
why would, like, and it definitely took a while to break that down. So whether we realize it or not, it's impacting how we run our program going forward. And if we're
Absolutely.
closing ourselves off, that's
Mhm.
really challenging. That's kind of um counterintuitive to, like, we want to keep people in the building, right? Like, but if you're pushing them away because you're afraid of the same thing happening, I mean, you're basically like kicking them out the door.
Right. Right. And it results in the exact thing that you don't want.
Yeah,
You're also responding to the needs of people who are gone. Like those people left,
they left and they're not here,
they're not here, but now,
yeah,
right, now
constructing
you're doing this thing, and it's like, okay, I'm responding to the needs of people who aren't even in the building
yeah.
anymore.
Yep.
So, well, this is a whole nother show. Now we've gone on a whole.
Now we have another topic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that topic though.
So for those of you who are just now joining us, that actually is not the topic that we were talking about, but we will. But the topic we are talking about with Ashley Mowrey today is how practicing self-compassion can improve the health and performance of both you and your youth performance athletes. We're nearing the end of this episode, but it's not too late. You can watch full episodes on YouTube at Apollo Performance or at TP Dance Creations. So please make sure that you go back and you listen to this episode. It has been amazing. There's so many nuggets, so much connection between us, understanding that we're not alone, and we know that you viewers out there are not are with us, and you are not alone either. So please make sure you go back and you grab this full episode and share it and drop your comments so we know exactly what you're doing out there and how you're feeling. We would love to know. It's homework time. Homework.
Yay!
Ashley is a seasoned vet on our show, so she knows all about the homework. What action would you like our viewers and listeners to take between now and next week to make progress in this area, Ashley?
Yeah. So I want everyone to visit selfcompassion.org, and on her website, and I think you all have the link too, directly to Kristen Neff has developed a test where you can test your levels of self-compassion, and it'll tell you within the 3 different components that we talked about today, that self-kindness, that common humanity, that mindfulness, where you are right now within your level of self-compassion. And that can be a really great starting point to see, like, oh, okay, I'm practicing self-kindness, but not really mindfulness, and so
Yeah.
to see where we need to practice. And then under her practices tab, I encourage everyone to look at that and pick one exercise to do this week on your own, and maybe even do it with your dancers, especially during competition season. We all need some self-compassion, and this could be a really nice thing to include in your class. Most of them are really short. And so I want everybody to go and do one of those this week.
I love that. I think that'd be such a great group exercise to do before like a nationals or a last competition of the season, or even recital. Like, what a
Yeah.
great way to keep in mind to, you just go easy on yourself, right? Like for the kids and your own mental sanity.
Right.
So yeah,
Exactly.
that's fantastic. We we want everybody to take the Steps Initiative course, because
Right.
that's how this whole show started. We have our free Steps Initiative course. It's we're going to put the link in there, but you can take, this is 5 course modules that you can take at your own pace. They are loaded with a ton of information and education and resources about things like racism, gender equity, sex abuse and prevention, nutrition, psychology, and dance medicine and science. And by no means is it everything you ever needed to know, but it is a great jumping off point for you to hopefully take that next step and go further on your own and learn even more, and take this back to your day-to-day life and your work environment, whatever that may be, and just practice a little bit of more consciousness and awareness in what you're doing. So we're going to pop that link in for you as well. We're going to make sure we put the links in for the resources that Ashley shared today as well, so you'll see that in the final episode. But Ashley, for now, tell us what you have going on and how people can get in touch with you. I really want everybody to stop and write this down, because Ashley does work virtually. She does fantastic work with faculty, for conventions, for studios, bodies of students, teams. There is no limit to what she can do and what she will do. She does live classes for Apollo, and you can catch her on our live content on social media, which in YouTube, which is fantastic. But how can people get a hold of you and what's new?
Yeah, so my website is ashleymowrey.com, and that has all my information, whether it's individual one-on-one coaching that you want to do. I do that completely virtually. So wherever you are in the world, we can hop on Zoom and coach. And then there's also information about studio and team workshops on my website. I do those virtually and in person. And then my Instagram is at ashley.mowrey.mindset. You can find a lot of free tools and resources there and connect with me on that. And then I also work for Embody Dance Conference, which is a dance convention and competition. We're rounding out our season for this year, but you can look at we're going to come out with our dates soon for next season. And during Embody Weekends, I do mindset skills for all of the age groups, including parents and teachers. So that's a really great way to connect. And then I'm also going to be speaking on May 20th at the National Dance Coaches Association conference in Phoenix, Arizona for high school and college coaches. I'm doing 2 seminars, one on balance and boundaries, which I know we've talked about. So I'm excited to talk about that again in that space. And then the second one, funny enough, is on self-criticism versus self-compassion and how coaches can help their students through self-criticism with self-compassion. So I'll be doing that on May 20th, and I hope that coaches can join us there.
Love our friends at National Dance Coaches Association. Shout out to NDCA. You're doing great work. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us again. We always appreciate having you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you all for having me. Love being here.
Great to have you back. Looking forward to our third installment of your series with us this season. So thank you for being here and coming back for the third series. Thank you so much, Bree, for being an amazing co-host and doing this with me every single Friday. We are on a roll, y'all. This is season 3, and we're making this into a podcast. So then you can not only watch, but you can listen all at the same time. You can never get enough of us. So please be on the lookout for that. Our next show is so very near and dear to our hearts. May is Suicide Awareness Month, and we want you to tune in for an important conversation that we will be having next week with Fonda Bryant about how we can identify our students, our friends, our family, our people who are around us, our team members that may be at the risk of taking their own life or risk of suicide. That show is going to be so informative and so helpful, and it could save a life. So please tune in for that episode with Fonda. And you can find all of our episodes on YouTube at Apollo Performance or at TP Dance Creations. Please check those out. Everything from season 1 all the way up to now is there. So you can find anything and everything you want. Until then, make sure you do your homework and continue your journey beyond the steps. We'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.